All right. Welcome everyone to the next session. This session is the Proliferating Renewables, Generating and Procuring Renewable Energy. For those of you that are looking to receive continuing education credits, whether through the AIA or another industry organization, this is the session description and learning objectives. We will be following up the teach-in with a survey form that helps us collect the information to process your continuing education credits. So be on the lookout from that from us at Architecture 2030 after the session. I'd like to start the session off by introducing our panelists today. I am very pleased to bring from Melbourne, Australia, Patrick Gorr, Energy Commercial Lead in Australia from Arup, who's going to be speaking to us, actually a spin on the renewables topic as it relates to renewable storage. So I'm really excited about his participation, and his colleagues from Arup have joined us for the previous two sessions. So if you're interested in those, please go onto the website to take a look afterwards. We're also joined by Orrin, the Director of International Programs for the Center for Resource Solutions. You may be familiar with the Center for Resource Solutions, also known as CRS, from their Green E certification for renewables. And Orrin's going to talk about offsite procurement mechanisms for procuring renewable electricity. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Patrick. Patrick, you can kick us off, and I'm going to spotlight your video.
Cheers, Vincent. Hi, everybody. Hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yep, everything looks good. Yep.
Great. So my name's Patrick Gore. I'm, as Vincent introduced, I'm the regional commercial lead for our energy business in Australia. We cover a range of a portion of Southeast Asia and Australia and New Zealand. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is a bit about district energy storage and why we need it, and why we see it as a growing part of our renewable energy business. Just before I get into that, a little bit about Arup. We're a global professional services firm, generally designers, planners, engineers. It's a multidisciplinary firm. We're across 33 countries, about 15,000 people. We're a fairly unique professional services firm in the sense that we are owned by our employees, and that drives a particular culture where we maintain our independence in order to drive the decisions that we make. And that puts us in a fairly different strategic position to a lot of other organizations. That gets us to the point where we are a purpose-driven firm. Arup is incredibly values-based, and so we look at our total architecture and holistic approach to infrastructure. So for me personally, I sit in our infrastructure business, and we take a very holistic approach to how we work out integrated solutions. We think of our quality of work as being technical excellence, but at the same time, we're a humane organisation. We value fairness, equality, and we exist for our people and their interests. Our work has to be useful socially. It has to have a link to society. We only deal in straight and honourable dealings, which is our ethics-based values. And finally, we look at reasonable prosperity. So we're not a greedy firm. We think that our reward is achievement, and our clients pay us in a way that remunerates us to reflect that achievement. So Arup globally is signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals. So for those of you who aren't familiar with that, the UN has outlined 17 goals. All of our dealings, all of our work has to align with this, and we only take on jobs and clients that do align to at least 4 of these goals. So the services we provide are, well, we are a professional services firm, but we cross advisory services, buildings, digital, infrastructure, planning, and technical consulting. But we look, for me in the energy business, I sit across all of those services, and we provide services into clients that range in any part of those businesses. So getting into identifying the problem. And I'm going to talk particularly about Australia in this instance, because it's something where solar is a vast resource, and Australia has one of the best solar resources in the world, with a huge amount of land available to us. But one part of our industry that's growing extremely rapidly is rooftop solar, and that's particularly important, I guess, for this conference, because it's something that we can look at, that anybody can do. It's applicable for people can put it on their houses, we can put it on large developments, we can put it on multi-story buildings. It can go anywhere, right? However, you can capture that solar, you can put a solar panel on your house, but you don't necessarily have a way of capturing that power, that electricity, and storing it. Batteries at a grid scale are extremely expensive. Batteries that are at a very small scale, at a retail scale, at a residential scale, even more expensive. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So how do we load shift that power? How do we move that power from the point of the day where we generate it, which is generally the middle of the day, to the times when we need it, which is at the morning peak and the afternoon peak? So this is a little bit of a graph about the generation mix, the energy generation mix in Australia, and this shows in the and I'm going to try and highlight this, but in the center here of the light yellow, that's rooftop solar, and the impact of rooftop solar generation on the grid. So it's growing at such rapid pace that the current peak rooftop solar generation in Australia is around 6 gigawatt hours. Now, last week, this is a graph from last week. This shows that rooftop solar made up around 25% of the peak demand at that part of the day. So this is a really important graph to show. Our Australian Energy Market Operator estimates the growth of rooftop solar to around about 25 gigawatts by 2035. So in 15 years, the market operator is estimating that our entire demand for a day, at peak demand for a day, which is around about 24,500 megawatts at the moment, could be provided by rooftop solar. But again, it's not a dispatchable resources. So how do we augment it? How do we capture this rooftop solar? These programs, though, this rooftop solar program is growing in popularity in Australia, and that's because of governments, and they're keen to get people to get involved with these programs because it can reduce your power bill. You can get involved and feel like you're doing something to do a bit of climate action. And in Victoria, which is where I'm based, the Victorian government has a program to install rooftop on 700,000 homes. So that's around about at 5 kilowatt systems. That's around 2.4 gigawatts of electricity coming into the grid, and it can cause some issues, right? So it can create what we call the duck curve, and you can see the graph at the bottom here is showing how that morning peak and afternoon peak, how the operational demand works, and how when you've got a huge belly of solar in the middle of the day, it's going nowhere at some points. So our current energy mix is dominated by thermal brown coal. That has reliability issues. So we need to think about where the opportunity is, and that opportunity sits in batteries. So battery technology is innovating quickly. In actual fact, the demand for electric cars is driving the cost of batteries and the density of batteries, and the supply chain, the global supply chain of batteries, to be more efficient, faster even than what solar panels were. So if we look at the generational change in solar panels, we saw over 40 years, there was around a 300% drop in price. Battery costs are doing that over around 15 years. So what we're seeing at the moment is that by 2022, the Economist and the US Department of Energy estimates that the battery cost would be around about $50 per kilowatt hour. Now that's at a wholesale level. That's at a grid scale level where you can have economies of scale. For the retail buyers, it's still not quite down there. So how do district batteries, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, offer a solution to this, and how do developers get involved in being part of that solution? So district level batteries are community batteries. They are batteries that are located on estates. They're located in the bottom of buildings. They're located in small parking areas, and the purpose of them is to provide district level or community level electricity and storage. Estate developers, we know, are already providing users with heating and cooling at a district level. So energy and gas could be easily embedded into these networks. So it's not such a far cry to think about how storage can also be used. So what are we expecting developers to do? We think they can and should play a role in offering safe, clean and reliable energy. And it's easy for them to do this because it doesn't really take a lot to add a few containers into an estate planning. Now, why do we think about district level batteries? What's the purpose? What are the issues they can solve? Excess rooftop solar, locally generated. A local battery can act as a solar sink, and that is where they absorb the solar that's generated from the local community into that battery and stores it. It offers load shifting for that power from the middle of the day to the evening peak or the morning peak, depending on when the community needs that power to happen. You can provide some sort of stabilized electricity power supply. So for us in Australia, when we have peak summer periods with bushfires and our thermal coal generators can struggle to operate at an optimum temperature and they shut down, batteries can step in and provide some of that power. They reduce this demand on thermal coal or thermal energy and helps to bring down our carbon emissions. Your local distribution companies, so those people that are providing you with your electricity at a local level, can use your battery in your community for frequency control. And that's very important if you need to have, all grids need to have a set level of frequency. And if distributors can have access to a battery to act as a load or a generator, then they can use that to control the frequency. And finally, the market operator can avoid curtailing solar generation in high times. And this happens in Australia, actually, when we have rolling blackouts and we have peaks in solar and wind generation, that they get curtailed in the marketplace. So what does it mean? Like, how does this all work? District level batteries are not just for new estates. Existing communities can utilize this concept. It's not a difficult thing to do. Like I said before, these are generally small. They're small batteries. I mean, they're larger than what you have on the side of your house, but in terms of size, they're around about a container or 2 containers, so 40-foot containers. You can use in commercial and industrial applications in local areas. In your local distribution grid can be utilized for energy storage hubs. It enables communities to procure and install batteries, and that can be incentivized by having the right operators that can monitor those. And those right operators, in most instances, are distribution network operators. And those companies generally are also looking for this type of control because it solves a problem for them where they've got too much solar coming into their distribution network. They've got something that can soak up that power, makes a huge difference to them. It avoids the need for additional transformers and inverters and line upgrades and all that sort of stuff. However, to enable all this to happen, you need to have the right planning controls. You need to have developers that are willing to design their estates with buildings that can take on this sustainable type of electricity storage. And you need to have planning and controls that enable them to do this. So I'm going to hold there for the moment. I think we're going to shift off to Orrin, but thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to the Q&A afterwards.
Thank you, Patrick. We're getting some good questions in for the Q&A section, but you're right, we are going to switch to Orrin. So Orrin, go ahead and share your presentation, and I will get your video spotlighted.
Great. Well, thank you, Patrick, for that presentation on battery storage. My name is Orrin Cook, and I am the Director of International Programs at Center for Resource Solutions. We're based here in California. We can certainly relate with Patrick's experience with bushfires and and other wildfires. We've been going through them here locally for the last few weeks, and it's also interesting to see the common link with battery storage, as that market here is certainly starting to take off as well, and can see the value of it in terms of a resiliency aspect as we look at the ways in which the power grid is affected by some of these events. Great, so CRS is, I'll just provide a little bit of brief background. We're a global NGO. We're based here in San Francisco, and our mission is to create policy and market solutions to advance sustainable energy. And as Vincent mentioned, we are probably best known for our Green E certification program. And this certification mark exists in what we call the voluntary market, where both residential consumers and corporations may be able to purchase or procure renewable energy through different providers, whether directly through a generator or through a utility or other options. And Green E acts as a trusted sort of risk reduction and transaction level certification to provide guarantees to customers that what is being delivered are clean renewable energy, and that the customers have exclusive rights to all of the attributes. As an organization, we also operate a couple of other programs, certainly in the form of education. We have our own conference called the Renewable Energy Markets Conference, which actually is started today here on the West Coast. So that runs for the next few days. We also have a conference that is teed up to go for March, and that is focused on, in some ways, the content of my presentation today around opportunities to procure renewable energy in Asia. And so Renewable Energy Markets Asia is that platform, and that will be happening virtually in March. We also provide a good level of technical assistance. And the last few years, we've focused on supporting market infrastructure for these voluntary and corporate transactions in Asia. So we've worked very closely with agencies in China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong to help them develop REC, Renewable Energy Certificate, and tracking system infrastructure, which I can talk a little bit about how that plays into offsite procurement activities from corporates. And then finally, I'll just mention that we just launched a initiative called the Resilient Schools Collaborative, which does look at microgrids and islanding schools for being able to keep the power on at the local site level when kind of wider outages occur. So I'll jump right into this idea around purchasing renewable energy offsite. And what I'd like to start with is just the fact that companies currently are taking action in this regard. For those who have not heard of RE100, it's an initiative that is really meant to encourage companies to sign up and commit to 100% renewable energy by a certain timeline. And so within the last few days, the initiative has seen the number of companies cross 250 that have committed to 100% renewable energy. And it's encouraging to see that they're, on average, these companies are committing to achieve that 100% target in the next 8 years. We've seen a number of companies that have already met this goal, and the majority as well. I think 75% are looking to meet this goal by 2030. So certainly a lot of very recognizable companies. The trend is for more renewable commitments, both at the company level, as well as those companies looking into their supply chains, which is another reason why you see some more renewable energy transactions starting to take place in the Asia region as well. And there are a few key drivers for why companies are starting to look at renewable energy. Firstly, it helps to demonstrate a climate commitment. And this can be demonstrating that for the for the effective meeting building certifications. Could be that it's looking at tenants in your building, or employees, or customers or shareholders as well. I think we all are increasingly seeing a need to demonstrate action on climate-related activities, and so this is certainly an effective way to do that. We also see that it can, in certain instances, reduce your financial risks. Renewable energy is typically characterized by having zero fuel costs, or near zero fuel costs. So ideally, companies can lock in electricity costs that protect them from rising electricity rates over time. And certainly, as part of demonstrating your climate commitment, it's in effect cutting your carbon footprint as well. And that's, we can certainly talk about how that's quantified, but there's great guidance by CDP and WRI as organizations on how to account for renewable energy in your carbon portfolio. So how are these companies sourcing renewable energy offsite or in general? We see four main ways. So the most common ways for actually on-site renewable energy, which certainly solar being paired with battery storage now is an interesting way of achieving that on-site component. But in terms of off-site, we see globally that there are three other main ways, and there are variations on each of these. But the first is what's called an Unbundled Energy Attribute Certificate. Here in the US, we call it a Renewable Energy Certificate, a REC, and I'll get into that in just a moment. We also see corporate power purchase agreements, or PPAs, where companies are able to transact directly for both the power and the energy attributes from renewable energy generators. And then through utility green procurement programs, sometimes referred to as utility green pricing programs, or retail green power programs. Those are certainly a few ways in which most of the corporates are now procuring renewable energy offsite. So one of the key components of offsite renewable energy procurement are what are called renewable energy certificates. And a renewable energy certificate is essentially represents the environmental attributes associated with 1 megawatt hour of generation from renewable energy facilities. And this accounting instrument can be used and needs to be accounted for in all of the different procurement types that customers encounter. And so I'll explain a little bit about the others, but one common way and an easy way to start with procuring renewable energy offsite is through the purchase of what's called unbundled renewable energy certificates. And in this case, the customer is not buying power itself, but is instead buying the environmental attributes from a renewable energy generator that it's put renewable energy onto its local grid. And in this way, the customer who purchases the renewable energy certificate can claim ownership of those attributes and be entitled to make renewable energy claims for themselves. In the case of a power purchase agreement, we see that there is a direct relationship between the customer and the generator, and typically it can be done in the form of a physical delivery of both the electricity and the environmental attributes. And so in this case, the utility, which may be responsible for transmission and distribution, would still act to in this model in its same capacity as working with the transmission and distribution of that electricity, and the customer would simply pay what's sometimes referred to as a wheeling fee, or transmission and distribution costs associated with the power that the generator that they've contracted the electricity for is generating. There are certainly other structures that can be used with power purchase agreements. Sometimes these are called sleeved PPAs or financial PPAs, contract for differences. There's a variety of different ways in which customers can participate in this model, even in an aggregated way. So if you're perhaps a smaller business and you're looking at trying to procure from a large wind farm, for example, you might be able to join with a few other companies to secure an agreement. Those are kind of some newer innovative models that we've seen emerge here locally in the US. And what I'd like to highlight is that this model of power purchase agreements has really been one of the key drivers in corporate procurement over the last few years here locally in the US. And what we've seen is that the demand reached last year over 9 gigawatts of new corporate deals that were signed for typically wind or solar generation. And in 2018, that corporate demand represented over 50% of all new electricity contracts, new renewable energy contracts here in the US. So it's been a significant driver of helping to add more renewable energy onto the grid. And I think one of the key elements of this is that it's been driven initially by corporate social responsibility, by looking at how do companies take steps to reduce their carbon footprint. And it's married that with a very clear financial win for companies as well. And so we've seen that as we look at the cost curves for solar and wind, as they've come down significantly over the last few years, they've actually become cheaper than what you would typically find in terms of certainly coal in the US, but is often becoming the cheapest source in certain locations here in the US as well. And so where that's possible to achieve those types of differences between the existing tariffs that a customer may pay and a much lower rate that could be available through a power purchase agreement, or a flat rate that a customer can sign up to and avoid paying escalating electricity rates over time. It's a proposition that works well when you talk with a CFO, in addition to anyone who's sitting on the corporate sustainability team. And so finally, just to highlight the retail green pricing option, this is one in which companies can procure through either a utility. In often cases, there are countries in which there's just a single national utility. And if they were to offer an option to pay an additional amount for renewable energy, you could do so and have the certain attributes then delivered to you as a customer. There are other markets where what you might call competitive markets or restructured markets, where there's retail choice. And in this way as well, customers can choose their electricity provider, and some of those may be able to offer green power options to those customers. So again, just to bring it back, the way that all of these products work is that in order to be able to make a claim that you actually use renewable energy, you need to have contractual rights to the renewable energy certificate, and only the owner of the REC or the EAC is another name for it, the environmental energy attribute certificate, can claim the environmental benefits and the usage of claim of clean energy production. They're certainly required for all the different products, and again, it's both an accounting tool for all of the products as well as can be an unbundled option. So you can, in certain markets, buy renewable energy certificates separate from any other power, or it's a standalone product that you can purchase to match your own electricity usage with. So perhaps we can focus briefly on Asia, just to highlight a few of the markets in which some of these products are available. And I'll highlight that with regards to RE100, there has been a strong demand seen over the last few years. So last year, over 40% of the new participants in RE100 joined from the Asia Pacific, which is great to see that these commitments are starting to take shape in the region. Although there are certainly challenges that do exist, and according to RE100 members, there are a few countries within the region: China, Japan, India, South Korea, that still have significant challenges in terms of being able to procure renewable energy offsite. When we look at unbundled RECs, though, there are certainly options that you can find in different markets. Some markets, the REC instruments are actually created by the government or government systems, and those can be found in China, Taiwan, India, Japan. And then in Southeast Asia, you typically find in South Asia some private providers of renewable energy certificates. These include IRECs or Tigers as instruments, and they can be procured, and typically you would want to procure them from the same country in which you have your operations. So that's a key component of making a claim too, is that the generation and the RECs need to come from the same market in which you operate. PPAs are beginning to emerge, I would say, a little bit more in the region, certainly not widespread. There are a few ways to do that in China. Taiwan, which I'll talk about in a second, has had some reforms that have allowed that to move ahead, and with some interesting results, successful results, I would say, early in the market there. India, Japan, and Vietnam. Japan, corporates can't do direct power purchase agreements there, but they may be able to get them through a retail provider in what's called a sleeved PPA. And in Vietnam, they're very close to allowing for sort of a pilot run of what are called DPPAs, or direct power purchase agreements, which are actually what's called a contract for difference, which I won't get into, but it just is a new opportunity there to perhaps procure both renewable energy and have a price hedge that can exist in the market. So just very briefly on Taiwan, this is kind of an interesting demonstration of the way in which corporates, in this case, mostly led from US companies, and I would say probably Google and Apple, led this off, which was really kind of agitating or asking for ways in which they could transact renewable energy within the market. The central government authorized the creation of the Taiwan REC, or TREC, and that is a renewable energy certificate and track system that helps function as sort of the market infrastructure. And then they passed legislation that allowed for direct power purchase agreements between the generators and the buyers. And then in 2019, both Google and Apple announced their first renewable energy procurement activities there in the market. Green EU, the program that we run, also announced its formation there. And then what's interesting is that this year in May, a customer of, or a supplier of Apple, I should say, TSMC, announced the largest corporate power purchase agreement that's been recorded yet, 920 megawatts of offshore wind from Ørsted in Taiwan. And so that was a very significant development globally, and I think highlights the demand that's present here from the corporate side in offsite renewable energy transactions. Finally, there are a few markets in Asia that do have retail green pricing. Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan are kind of good examples of that. And it's obviously hard to provide a in-depth across Asia on all the different opportunities, but I would say that just to recap, that this is certainly an area that is growing significantly in terms of both the interest in renewable energy procurement, as well as the options that are becoming available to customers. And so I would certainly pay attention to this market as it grows and evolves over the coming years, and happy to answer questions about any of the markets in particular, or general questions about corporate procurement following this panel. So I think that wraps it up for me, and appreciate the opportunity to participate in this event.
Thank you, Orrin, for that presentation. Lots of really great knowledge to help our clients and those that are owners on to understand what options are available in each of their locations. Really appreciate that. I'm going to bring back, just going to stop your presentation and bring back Patrick for us. Should both be visible on the screen now. We had some questions come in for Patrick. We only have about 4 minutes to cover them. But Patrick, one of the questions that came up that you did answer in the chat window, but maybe you could elaborate a little bit about it. I know one of the things that been interesting across the world is this idea of seasonal demand. And you know, are battery solutions a solution for more interim demand, or can we store these, you know, the solar in the summer and use it in the winter? You know, what does that solution set look like? It's a little bit of a different spin since you answered the question more technically, but I'm curious on how you could cover seasonal demand with storage.
Yeah, thanks, Vincent, and thanks to Aaron for asking the question. I guess for seasonal demand changes, I wouldn't think that battery, like short duration power batteries are the most appropriate at a district level, but for longer duration, larger scale, you would look to a number of other different technologies. So I would be looking to things like pumped hydro. In the Scandinavian countries, they've used hydrogen very effectively. There's liquid air or compressed air that are all used. That generally you're looking at something that requires no power or has no parasitic loss on it, so it doesn't require any maintenance to really store that energy, which is why pumped hydro is really great for that type of thing. But again, like any type of gas that can be compressed and then released to then spin a turbine of some sort, also really helpful. So yeah, in short duration kind of lithium ion batteries aren't the greatest for seasonal demand shifting, because they require power to run them and HVAC and that sort of thing to keep them at a constant temperature. So we would look to a different type of technology in that instance.
Great, thanks for that. And then, Orrin, I've got a question for you to wrap things up here. Given that we're starting to see renewables in terms of generation popping up as sort of the most cost-effective way at a scale, what are the obstacles in some of these regions that you mentioned before with just getting the contracts going? You mentioned that some of them are starting to launch now, but what's going to get this to scale in these areas?
Yeah, I think there's
just about the contracts.
Well, I think when you look at what's really needed, I think a lot of it comes down to the policy and the market structures that are in place. I think where you have, you know, certainly in Asia, there are a number of countries that have national level utilities that where you don't necessarily have restructured markets. It's more of a kind of monopoly utility environment. I think in those circumstances, you would need the participation of that utility to be able to offer contract models that allow for customers to participate in and to look at securing power from large-scale generators through their utility. And so you really have to work with that utility as a partner, or in the case of Taiwan, you restructure some to allow for power purchase agreements, that model to exist and to be allowed from a legislative standpoint. And so, you know, those aren't easy conversations to have within markets. So I think those are sometimes, you know, require a lot of different stakeholders to participate and to weigh in. But certainly, I think having the right market structure as well as the right infrastructure in place too. I mentioned sort of the RECs and tracking systems. Those are all important. And then, I think what we see is that there are a lot of subsidies in the region in terms of feed-in tariffs as well, and that can also be a challenge in terms of if you're a corporate that's looking to procure renewable energy in certain markets where it's available, they're having to compete with favorable subsidies that are really helping to bring more renewable energy online. But from a generator perspective, you might rather go with a guaranteed feed-in tariff from a utility or through the government, rather than the risk that might be involved in a corporate off-taker. And so I think where those subsidies start to kind of come a little bit lower, and where renewables become cheaper than grid rates, you'll see these markets really take off, and I think the scale will certainly come. And as we've seen in Taiwan with close to 1 gigawatts of new renewables signed, there's really a significant amount of demand that's present that hopefully we'll be able to emerge in the coming years.
Thank you, Orrin. Really great. It's interesting to see the utilities at the center of all of this, and sometimes a little legislative pressure eases up that mechanism. So thanks for that answer. And unfortunately, we are out of time. We're a little bit over. So I want to thank you both again for your presentations. Great topics. I think a lot of new content here from the other teach-ins. So really a great compliment to the 3 days that we've put together. So we want to thank you again, Patrick and Orrin, for joining us and providing us with your expertise. Really, really important work on this front for decarbonizing the built environment. So thank you for that. Would like to say to the attendees that this concludes this session. We do have a break here before the next sessions of content. And during that break, we will have tool demos. So go back to the CarbonPositive agenda page and you'll see the links to the individual tool demos that are available. There's 2 half-hour sessions available that start here in 2 minutes. And I'm going to go start one of them. So thank you again for everybody for joining this session. And thank you again to Orrin and Patrick.
Thanks very much for having me.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Vincent. Appreciate it.